Good evening, everybody, and thank you for welcoming us into your homes this evening in this very brisk and moist Melbourne evening. Good to see the seasons back with us again. Welcome to this charged chat for the 8th of June. We look as though we've got a full dance card, and we're expecting a few really interesting people to join us tonight. Just moving on, we're going to be hearing tonight from James Pawley, owner of Traction EV, Graeme Manietta, owner of Oz DIY, who's got a really interesting project to talk about, and Luke Konynenburg, a special guest and owner of a Mercedes 450 SL, which looks like a really, really interesting project. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping is that everyone is muted to avoid background noise, barking dogs, washing machines, etc. Please use the chat button to say hello to everyone else. And it would be nice to hear where you're actually dialing in from tonight, listeners. If you do need to ask a question, feel free to use the Q&A box and we'll get to those at the end of the session. Hello to Dubai, Ahlan, Marhaba. Moving north in Victoria, good to have you aboard. It'd be nice and cool down there. Please note that this presentation is being recorded and will be posted to the EV Alliance YouTube channel tomorrow morning. A link for the recording and information about how to connect with the EV Alliance will be listed at the end of the presentation. Welcome aboard again, and I hope you all enjoy the session. So tonight's conversation FAQ is: what do EV conversion companies look like internationally? I suppose the simple answer is they're small and green and speak like Martians, but otherwise, we've got Lunars who are focused on high-end conversions. And they recently started converting garbage trucks. And you can see here two different versions of the garbage trucks. One is a truck for garbage, and the other one is a garbage car. Now, what's really interesting about this one is that there have been some recent investments by David Beckham of football fame, which certainly brings EV conversion to a much, much larger and more general audience, leveraging his fame. Is there anyone who has heard or seen or knows anything about Lunars that they'd like to share?
No, I'm just hearing about him for the first time.
Okay, well, I think it's really, really interesting that they're looking at existing infrastructure and looking how to best repurpose that. So taking the path of least resistance in a way, and really, really using EVs in a really sensible way. That is short journeys, not a huge distance to cover, so range anxiety is not going to be so much of an issue. But certainly the high-end Bentley Continental there that Bex is recharging certainly speaks to the higher end of the market as well, and recently featured in Top Gear's Electric Awards. What a turnaround that is, from hating electric cars under the troglodytes to now embracing electric cars for the fantastic things that they really are. So that'd be really interesting to see what Bex gets up to there. Next is the Transition One electric car for all, which again, supported by the French government, claim to convert cars in 4 hours, which seems like a remarkable turnaround. And I'd be interested to know if there's anyone who could share some insights about how they could possibly achieve that. No.
It sounds unbelievable. It sounds very difficult. Even if you had, you know, a set vehicle that you had everything modular and ready to go, it's hard to believe you could even strip out the ICE components and, you know, prepare it for an electric drivetrain in that time.
Yeah. And so you wonder perhaps if they're just bolting a small AC50 onto an existing gearbox and having them on the shelf ready to pop in.
Still taking out fuel tanks, fuel lines. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I'd spend 4 hours just going out the mechanicals.
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe they use a gear team. They've got lots of experience in that sort of thing. Now, Paul Marsic has just posted up a couple of links there to Transition 1 and the other one to Luna's design. And I think what's really important about Transition 1 is that it's got government support. And sometimes you need the weight of government behind an incentive to really give it some punch. And then back to Germany, Zeil Abeck and ERV offering to convert sightseeing buses to electricity through retrofit. And this would seem to me to be, I suppose, a relatively straightforward conversion, given that buses tend to have long, flat floors that perhaps make it easy to stick big battery packs into. Has anyone seen anything about this?
Haven't seen anything about this particular one, but in a previous life, I did run a bus company, and I'd have to agree, anything like that yellow one on the right that's got the storage bins underneath seems like a lay down misère to make a good conversion.
And also in terms of weight distribution, it would keep all the mass way down below the axle line and within the wheelbase, which would be good. And I suppose they've also, because they've got a modular drivetrain, and often they have CVTs or automatic transmissions, it would certainly make it easier. And thank you to Paul again for posting a link to IAV. Hola to Andres from Colombia. Welcome to the panel. And Paul has accurately described himself as Googling like a madman here. So hopefully dressed in a really sharp suit and working for an advertising agency in Madison Avenue. So what we've seen here are some really, really interesting things that are aimed at the mass market and the general population rather than at the small enthusiast market, which I think is a really, really interesting way of going about it. So this month's second conversion FAQ is that if we refer back to a couple of weeks ago, there was some talk about there being not much consistency in the way that EVs were being assessed for their effectiveness and for range and for performance in day-to-day situations, unlike petrol-driven cars or diesel-driven cars, where you've got the standards for fuel efficiency, fuel economy, and emissions with their city and country cycles. There doesn't seem to be the equivalent for electric vehicles. And so my thought was that most dynos now have got drive cycle simulation capability in their software. And the drive cycle is where you can simulate driving conditions by altering the load on the dyno, so the car has to respond. And so I was thinking to myself, how hard can it possibly be to perhaps create a default set of road profiles that anyone could feed into any simulation dyno like this, so that we could get some form of effective benchmarking or performance tuning for electric vehicles. So I'd be interested to hear if the panel's got any opinions or thoughts about that.
I'll chip in, I suppose. Not really have any thoughts about it, because a lot of the, when we're dealing with a client, we sort of basically use maths to work out, you know, what possible range they're going to get. And that generally seems to work out pretty close to the mark, you know. This sort of standardization you're talking about here, I guess, would be more so for the electric vehicle manufacturers when they're quoting range and so on. And there's apparently several different formulas, and none of them really make a lot of sense.
And so you think that there would be a relatively simple way of just plugging some parameters into a formula and having it spit out an answer that's going to be relatively real world?
Well, I think so. I mean, when we're sort of proposing a conversion for a client, we get the data of the vehicle, the rotate, the tyre size, the weight, yada, 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 and the dip ratio. And then we sort of work it out from there. And that gives us the size of the motor we really want to be looking at. And then that leads on to the size of the pack and so on. So I can't see any other way of doing it. It is a mathematical equation. Doesn't allow for hills and dips and so on, but if you're looking for an accurate, a relatively accurate range assumption, that's about as close as we can come. But to put it on some machine and try to work it out that way, that all comes back to the guy operating the machine, which is a bit like, like letting Volkswagen trick the emissions things on their diesels. I mean, that's just another way, I think, of leaving a loophole there to give a false impression. But it's not something I'm giving a lot of thought to, I'm afraid.
Okay. Maybe I spent too much time by myself in a small dark room, but it was certainly something that interested me, given that I've had a fair bit of experience with dynos and ICE engines. It's always been interesting. And it's interesting that you also pick up the Volkswagen simulator, which Greg from Darwin also mentioned. Thanks, Greg. Welcome to the program. So that's something I might keep ticking over in the back of my mind, just to keep me happy and engaged and not causing trouble. And so now we come to what I think is a really, really interesting segment, Luke Konynenburg and his Mercedes convertible. So perhaps, Luke, if we could start with you, and maybe if you could give us a brief insight into who you are, what you do, and why you became interested in EV conversions.
Certainly, thank you very much. So my name's Luke Konynenburg. I work for a company called Green Energy Trading. So as you probably gathered, we work in the environmental space ourselves, not in EVs and conversions, unfortunately. I'd love to be. But yeah, we're an environmental trader and a certificate creation house. So what that means in real terms is we help businesses access incentives for doing solar and renewable energy and energy efficiency upgrades. So that's sort of my day job. But for 10, 12 years I've been there now, I've had to reconcile being a pretty much a dyed-in-the-wool old petrol head with wanting to be as appropriate and responsible as possible. So a bunch of things came together over the last 6 to 12 months where my wife finally gave me the green light to go ahead and get a weekend car, get options we never really had in much detail. And then a bunch of searches and so on that were sitting on eBay, and a board Sunday morning waiting.
I'm sorry, Luke, you seem to be dropping out.
One of my four sons to finish a training. Oh, that's no good. Any better now?
Yeah, that's better now.
Okay, I'll try to hold still and hope that the rest of the house aren't using too much, not running us down. So yeah, I was just saying, basically, I've always had a thing for Mercedes. My old man worked in commercials at Mercedes for about 20 years. He and I did a Target Tasmania in 1994 in one of these. So I've always had a bit of a soft spot for it. And yeah, when the opportunity came up to nab one in a pretty partially disassembled state, but with pretty good bones, I saw it as a good opportunity to jump in.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Luke, you might want to switch off your video. That might help with the bandwidth.
I can try. I think it's already off. I'm not communicating, but that is good advice.
Okay, so that's interesting. I did Target Tasmania in 1998, which is
there you go.
An epic event. It is one of the world's unsung great sporting events. And the time we did it, it was an FIA sanctioned event. So yeah, extremely well run, extremely exciting, and the pinnacle for that type of thing. And so That is fantastic. And so you went out and bought this big hairy, is it a hairy canary? Is it a yellow car?
It is indeed yellow. Yes, it's really funny to see that back in this time, that was one of 7 yellows that you could purchase the car in the late 70s,
Okay.
as opposed to 15 shades of grey or silver that you get now.
Yeah, the blancmange cars back in the day when colour was king. It's fantastic. And so it looks as though what we might call a splendid opportunity in quotes.
I think you're right there. How I got onto the idea of doing an EV is obviously I've been pretty interested in them for some time, and this looked like a good candidate for a few reasons. Firstly, because it's got 380,000 Ks on the existing engine. You'd be looking at anywhere from 10 to 15 to get that reconditioned, and then you've still got a weekend car that might be driven once every few weeks that may or may not decide to work when you need it.
Yeah,
might be smooth and comfortable when it's driving and glorious, but there's no guarantee it's going to be ready when you want it. On top of that, it's a whopping great thumping, V8 that isn't very powerful. It was smooth, but it on its best day, they could only muster around 250 horsepower. Yep. And used an awful lot of fuel to do it. So a repower of some description was on the cards, and I certainly looked at a few options like a later model 5.6 litre, or even, God forbid, an LS conversion, just to see what people were doing. But the only thing that really seemed to make sense to me, particularly for a weekend car, was to do an EV conversion. And as I looked further and further into it, I saw it's reasonably heavy. The engine and drivetrain, nearly 700 pounds, like it's well over 300 odd kilos. It's got an independent rear, so it seemed like it would line up with my choice of engine pretty well, choice of motor, and it's already disassembled and in a million pieces. So that's probably I'll get to learn where everything goes by trying to find where it goes to put it back together.
That's it. So it already being in pieces has taken out half the fun of the project, of course.
But at least I can't be blamed.
That's it. I actually had custodianship of the 560 SL for a little while, and absolute beast of a car. and we can maybe talk about that a little bit later. So it's you've had some thoughts about your power pack, and the old saying in engineering is, if it don't have a rotor, it's not a motor. So yes, it's not an engine, it's a motor. So can you give us some insights perhaps into the motor, transmission, battery configuration that you might be thinking of?
Certainly. So full disclosure here, like I'm so far just a keyboard warrior. I've done most of my research online and read a few books and so on. And I've just started talking to people here, some of the EV Alliance members, about what might be possible. My plan, as you can see from some of the notes up here, is that I think electric conversions are going to become the new resto mod. They're going to be the goal of people who want to preserve the looks and the feel of classic cars, but want them to be usable and don't want them to be, polluting and want to be able to use them. The idea that I want to, as you can see from the back there, it's got an independent rear. It looks to me like there's plenty of room and nothing too crucial in the way of dropping in a Tesla drive train in the back there, and that means I can take. Sorry, it tells me I'm unstable again. My apologies to everyone. I've been told that before.
Yeah, I'd just like to confirm that.
So yes, a Tesla Model X or Model S large drive unit, and then batteries. From what I understand, and again, I'm just a neophyte here, but you need something that has high discharge capabilities. Anything from a full Tesla pack looks like it's in the $30,000+ range and might not be that easy to fit. So I'm looking at other options that can handle the discharge. I'm quite prepared to compromise on range, but I really want something that can get me up to 400 volts and get me 100 to 150 k's range would be fantastic, I think, for all that this car is likely to do. And then down the track, as more OEM options start to come onto the market, I think there'll be other choices out there.
Okay, and so if we don't mind, if you don't mind, we can take a slightly closer look at your rear end, Luke, and what a fine rear end you have, I might say, sir. Now, from my recollection, these things can be a little bit unwieldy under heavy acceleration and braking. So I suppose one of the good things about this particular model is that they're well supported in terms of tuning and suspension upgrades. Is that what you've found as well?
Yeah, very much so. So the beauty of these is that it's a classic, but it's not a rare classic. So they've made more of these than any other SL, almost by a factor of 2 or 3 times. And so they've got a huge following. There's still plenty of parts, and there's, as you say, there's plenty of aftermarket support for them. There's a fabulous company in New South Wales that makes outlaw SLs. So they're frowned upon by most of the Benz fraternity, but they do full custom coilover kits for them. They've got a lot of experience in track and street use. You can pretty much tell them what your weight loadings and what you're looking for out of them, and they'll dial it in and send you a kit. So I think there'll be things need to be done. You might have noticed there was a sway bar mounted behind the diff in the previous shot, and that's not likely to be able to stay. So changing up the rates, the spring rates might definitely be on the card.
Have you thought of looking at bolting the complete Tesla cradle in?
Certainly a possibility. Yeah, it comes down to, I suppose, availability and integrating that with the existing substructure of the vehicle. Started the conversation with my engineer, and I'll be guided by him because he's the one who's going to have to sign off on everything. But I'd look for what's probably the straightest line between 2 points on this. So
in a high-powered Mercedes, there won't be such a thing as a straight line, I think, Luke. It'll all be sideways.
One can hope so.
But there's nothing wrong with that. And some of the other things that you were perhaps thinking of is that these things use pneumatics for a host of things like door lifts, window locks, heating and demisting. And they always give trouble. So what are your thoughts about rectifying some of those problems?
Gotcha. So I think the beauty of this is that, like I say, this is a classic, but it's not a rare classic. So if I change things, I can live with that, and I think the motoring community will forgive me. Likewise, this vehicle it's only a couple of owners, and I've got this fabulous service history that goes right back to delivery. I've got the original delivery documentation for it, but it does have 385,000 kilometres on it. It's no spring chicken. It's not a concourse example and never will be. So changing things for convenience and again, following that resto mod kind of a philosophy of making the things that aren't visible better, I'm all in favour of. So my plan is actually to try and make this, to take this as close as we can take it to an actual super light vehicle, as the vehicle was sold as, but never really was what you'd call super light. And with batteries, it's always going to be a challenge. But my aim is to remove the air conditioning, not replace it, and to pull out all the pneumatic system and just put electric solenoids in for those areas that need it. I'll probably attempt to simplify and manualize the air conditioning ducting and circuitry so that I can basically just have the mist or a bit of fresh air. I figure if you're driving a convertible, it's always going to be a weekend car. If you haven't got the top down, you're probably doing something wrong anyway. So I'm going to take the opportunity to simplify as much of the car as I possibly can.
Yeah, and just drill a couple of holes in the floor, let the water out. Really,
we can certainly do that.
That's all you need to do. And I know it's a bit of a piece of string question, but have you given yourself any timelines or budget for this?
I haven't given my wife one, so I think it's pretty safe she's not going to jump on this webinar anytime soon. I think that
geez, what a time!
A minimum of 30 to 40,000 to get it. Go on, sorry.
Oh, what a time for your microphone to drop out! I thought it was well planned.
Sorry, I was saying about 30 to 40,000 is to get it on the road, to get it back in back running. and then, you know, plus a lot of my work and weekends and everything, and what I can scam from friends and whatnot. But maybe, you know, maybe a little bit more than that too, depending on where we go with it. But yeah, there's, in terms of timeline, I think it's going to be definitely a couple of years. I've got a little bit of restoration work to do on it, not counting putting the rest of it back together. So I turned 50 in 3 years. So I'm wondering about if that's realistic to have it done by my 50th or not. I'm not a big one for putting that sort of pressure on myself, but yeah, that might be the goal.
Well, you need to have a goal to aim for, just so that you know by how much you've missed it. That's what I say.
Absolutely.
And so your answer to Jeff, not a big dollar Tesla jobby necessarily, but you're using a Tesla large drive unit in the back of the Mercedes.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of room under the bonnet. Plenty of room under the bonnet for a big packet of batteries.
Yeah,
which is fantastic.
The idea of going for the Tesla drivetrain rather than something like a Hyper 9 and using the existing transmission is every other option has got more challenges. So every other option, as well as, you know, being somewhat compromised, yeah, if there's no, I can't really keep the automatic transmission. So I've got to try and hunt down an ultra rare manual box for one of these, or use something like one of those EV talk boxes from the US. So the further I get away from sticking in a drive unit in the rear and mating it up directly to the existing drive shaft, the more complicated, and I reckon kind of the more costly it gets. So I guess I'm trying to take a big bite, or accept that it's going to be a big bite, and yeah, and run with that rather than start at the other end and die the death of 1,000 cuts.
Oh, that's fantastic. Looking forward to progress. And don't forget that the EV Alliance have got lots of training courses coming up and coming to be available. So don't forget to hook into those, not least because it could save your life. So there we go. So thank you very much, Luke. And I'm sure if anyone has got any questions, they can put them in the chat.
Fantastic.
As we go on. Oh, look at that. There it is again.
Budget's gone up already.
Well, I'm expensive. Okay, questions for the panel. Suggestions for EV engaged engineer to work with in East Melbourne.
I think
for me,
you already jumped on that the other day, but I'd welcome for some other options for people too. Yeah,
it's always good to get peer review and peer recommendations. But certainly, if you don't know of any, then I know the VicRoads website has got a list of VAS engineers who are able to certify this work. But yes, if anyone does have any clues about who would be a good engineer to work with, then perhaps either pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and that will be fantastic. All right, so if we then move on again, a deep dive. The man who put the Swift in Suzuki Swift, the Suzuki Swift Drag Car, which sounds like another fascinating project. So there it is, and perhaps, Graeme, if you'd just like to sort of jump in and get us started on that.
Yeah, sure. This was a turbo petrol drag car we built up, and you know, we sort of got to the finish of this thing about the same time as I got really excited about electric cars, and I decided to pull the pin on the turbo 1.6, and it's sitting in the workshop at the front counter there for someone to buy to put in their other car, and we decided to jump straight into doing this. Now, the real reason we're doing this Tesla conversion into the Swift is because our plan is to start making small drive units available with a subframe ready to go into a regular Suzuki Swift, like the 2005 to 2012 version. Oh yeah, there's the turbo engine on the right there.
Can you do it in 4 hours?
Sorry?
Can you do it in 4 hours?
No, I tried, but I probably got about nothing done in 4 hours. So Anyway, but as you can see, the Tesla small drive unit, that's actually a pretty good fit inside a little bonnet area, you know. So this is more or less some fun, but also a test bed to see, well, what can we do? What can we do as far as front wheel drive conversions using small drive units? Now, the maths is that if we ran this thing full noise, there was no hope of getting traction. Don't care what tyres, don't care what weight you put over the front, you will not get traction out of this thing. So instead of running the 360 to 420 volts that some people say you should run in them, we've opted to go for 240 volts because that's 300 horsepower sitting there with the full noise. We can't really use much more than about 225. So that's where we're going to, rather than detune the high voltage, we're just going to put a lower voltage into it. And I guess our reasoning is that that's going to be a little bit safer, less likely to let the smoke out and such, you know. So that's the plan for this particular car, and it's effectively a toy, but also to look at getting some more experience with this type of technology, tuning and so on, to offer it up as a like a kit. We'll be making up the subframe bracketry so that you can fit this into other cars. So effectively, because we're a Suzuki specialist, otherwise we figure, well, let's stick with the Suzuki Swift, the 05 to 2012 version. You can pick them up for a song if the motor's shot or the automatic shot. And so we make up a set of bolt-in brackets to hold the motor, modified drive shafts, and then work on some sort of bolt-in battery box. So the whole thing's meant to be, we put this thing on a pallet, we send it to you, you fit it, and make it as easy as possible. Can you imagine an 05 to 08 sort of Swift with you know, over 200 horsepower in the front? I think it'd be pretty scary. So that's the interior. It's gutted out because that's what you want in a drag car. We're also planning on getting a different set of gears made up for the Tesla front small drive unit because they're currently about 9.5 to 1. So we want to actually run something like a 4 to 1 and take this thing down to the Salt Lakes just for some shits and giggles, you know.
That'd be fun, and you won't have any trouble with dropping oil on the salt either.
Not one bit. Oh, there is oil in there because there is oil inside the transmission, and that's how they keep the electric motor cool, is by circulating oil, and they circulate the oil through a little intercooler sitting on the top of the motor. If you look in the top right-hand corner, just on top of the motor, you see something. That's it. You're pointing out just that's it there, and that's the intercooler. So water goes in one end and out the other, and oil's pumped through that. And that's hot oil, and that's how it heat exchanges the motor. The stats on that motor are pretty gobsmacking. It'll apparently run out to 18,000 RPM, something like about 900 Newton meters of torque, or something like that. But I think a lot of that's to do with the reduction drive. So yeah, but so yeah, that's it. I've actually got 2 minis at the moment. A mid-60s mini, awaiting the fabrication of the subframe for one of these. And as of today, a guy just booked in his, I think it's about a 2010 Mini for a Tesla unit as well. So for a front-wheel drive car, I find this an easy fit. It's not the fact that it's got a lot of horsepower, but it's a damn easy fit. And you've got the controller built in. So the only wiring you've got to worry about is that little plug on the driver's side there coming down. You can see just the wire. That's it. That's all you really got to worry about. Even the logic board is one of the ones from Damien over in Ireland, and you can talk to that with your mobile phone. So you don't even need to plug in to talk to your logic board. So I find the whole thing very easy to work with.
And are you will you be running a quaff as well to help reduce the torque steer?
Well, no, I'm a bit of a cheapskate, so we make our own. I've made up 10 units. I've got one in there to test. It's about an 80% limited slip diff, but we're talking about retail price around $800 as opposed to $3,000. You know, I love a quaff, but I've just got to watch my pennies as well. So this is all being done on a budget, which pretty much describes most of our clients. So most of our clients are working on a tight budget. And we're just trying to deliver the best possible bang for buck. And that's why we're spending the time and money to jig up to make this as like an easy install kit, so people can get a Swift and put 200 to 300 horsepower on the front, and that should be quite good.
Get to the crash faster than anyone else.
Probably, yeah.
And what sort of times would you expect to get on the drag strip with this?
Look, I'm hoping for around 10.5 to 11. That's what I'm hoping for. The car in its previous state was a 13.9, but that turbo motor on the right there was only 180 horsepower. Oh, that's at the wheel, so probably about 200 at the flywheel, something like that. So
why bother?
Yeah, well, they're problematic. I mean, I've got another Swift, a road going one. I've got exactly the same motor in, and it does that 14 seconds all the time on the quarter. So if we can take that out and put some extra horsepower in, the difference here is that engine builds up torque at around 4,750 to 5.5. That's where its torque peaks out. Whereas the electric motor, that's going to have torque all the way through. There's no gear changes. It's just one solid pull from the start to the finish line.
Okay. And how much would people expect to pay for one of these kits, do you think, when they're ready?
I have no idea. I think people should be realistic, expect to pay about 25 grand for something that'll do a couple of 100 Ks.
Yep. And I think that's in line with what's going on anywhere with conversions.
Yeah.
So,
I'm hopeful that the battery prices will come down some more, and I think they will. And this is where the game change is going to be, is when the cost of the component starts coming down, and our level of knowledge increases as we learn more. I think we'll do better. We'll do better price wise. We'll see more and more conversions in 5 years' time than we do now.
Yeah, that's looks fantastic and sounds fantastic, and what a great thing to do, because those little Swifts were always a pocket rocket, and this thing will make it interstellar.
Yeah. No, we got a lot of people looking at this, and not EV enthusiasts. I'm talking Suzuki enthusiasts. They just can't believe what's possible in such a tiny package.
That's Suzuki, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. Thank you, Graeme, for that. Looking forward to seeing the outcome, and certainly opening up the eyes of a lot of people to the potential.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think people have always said that you look good in a Mini, so you can take some note from that.
Fair enough.
Okay, so we do have some questions in the chat that we'll get to in a minute. I will highlight again that the DIY courses are here. Course 1 is how to plan an EV conversion for only $200 or for only $199. Course 1, how to plan an EV conversion. Sign up now. Because it's the old saying is to fail to prepare is to prepare to fail, or piss poor planning results in piss poor performance. So most of the heavy work in a project is actually in the planning and design. So please, the links have been put up into the chat box. So go there, get into the course and get yourself engaged and involved. So we might jump straight to the Q&A, if that's okay with the panel. From Paul Marstich, which tool do you suggest to attach the ends to 10-gauge wire? And from where do you buy wiring and connectors? And it will be interesting to know, Paul, just whereabouts you are. He's in Nagoya, Japan. Now, I do know that there are specific crimping tools available for heavy gauge wire and connectors. Has anyone in the panel got any recommendations about what to look for?
We just buy the crimping tools off eBay. I mean, my guys in the workshop are pretty shabby with tools. I don't want to spend too much on them because they end up getting broken, or lost. You know the story.
Yeah, and I suppose if you're only doing one car and a few connections, then you're not looking for something that's going to be heavy duty workshop. So any particular sites that you would go to get your wiring and connectors from?
The only thing, speaking from not EV specific, but when I used to run a different kind of workshop, yeah, we used to get pretty good quality stuff, consistent quality from Worth. That's WURTH. I think they're probably in Japan. They're all over the place. And again, they're not the cheapest, but they're pretty reliable. Their crimps and their crimping tools are designed to work together, pretty reliable. You'll only buy them once, unless you lose them. Yeah, worth a try.
And that's a fate worse than death. Another good brand is Utilux. Thank you, Brett. Often overlooked, Utilux, but a really good product and a really good company. And if you do get the high quality tool, you can always stick it back on eBay afterwards and get some of your investment back. But yes, certainly it can be a challenge in places like Japan, where the sort of infrastructure that we're used to doesn't exist or is easily accessible. Then there are some good questions I think I certainly take for granted that we can just go down to the shop and get stuff. Another question from Paul is, for a classic Mini, what batteries would you recommend?
Well, I'm actually a bit surprised that they don't have any wreckers that they can get good used cells out of. There must be damaged electric vehicles like Nissan Leafs or something over there. I mean, I don't understand what they do with their damaged cars. We don't see them here, so I would have thought there must be some sort of spare used parts over there. So I'm at a bit of a loss why I can't find them.
Okay, so Paul's saying the car companies return the cars to the manufacturer for recycling. Okay, but there's certainly lots and lots of Japanese spare parts imported into Australia, like front clips, rear clips, engine gearboxes, etc., etc. So they come from somewhere, but yeah, difficult one to know. But certainly, if I were to look at them, I would look at maybe the BMW i3 batteries. They're a nice square shape that might fit nicely in the back to replace the back seat. And you would only need a couple of them to get a really good response. Speaking to the manufacturers, I've also tried to speak to LG, but you've got to buy thousands and thousands. So sometimes you just need to buy a car with a pack and pull it apart to get the individual modules out of it. After, of course, you've done the DIY course on electrical safety with the EV Alliance.
There's one other thing here to keep in mind too, is that shipping of lithium-ion cells is problematic. I've tried to buy smaller battery packs for motorbikes and such. And by the time you messed around with all the paperwork and the EV safety, electric battery safety handling and yada yada yada, it's just such a pain in the bum, you know. So whereas when you look at secondhand EV batteries, usually you're better off buying the whole car to get the battery.
Yeah. And once you've done that, you come to the EV Alliance and do the DIY course on how to work with high voltage electricity. And Michael Turner's got a question, and we might make this the last one that I think, Graeme, talks directly to you. And that is, what challenges would be in a front wheel drive car conversion?
Okay, so Ray, pretty much, Michael, pretty much, you use a smaller EV motor with a gearbox, and you just made it up with an adapter plate and a connecting shaft. We've done them without a clutch completely, but that means you can't use regen. We've done them with a clutch, and that way you can use regen. So in a front wheel drive, you can make the motor straight at the gearbox. We've often done that, but the whole idea to messing around with small Tesla drive units is specifically for that front wheel drive application, where I think after all that, it'd be easy just to put one of those in. you look at the price of an EV motor, say Hyper 9, and you're up around that $8,000–9,000. Well, you can buy a Tesla motor for like about $5,000, and you've got to spend another couple of grand on it, but you've got a much better motor, I think. And it makes it easier. It does make an easier fit mechanically. That's probably the big issue.
Okay. What about some of the issues around weight distribution, braking, and suspension?
Well, the weight of the Tesla motor, I mean, was really, I think it was actually only a couple of kilos, literally heavier than what I had in there before, because I had a 4-cylinder motor with an automatic transmission. Took that out. The Tesla motors, I don't think it was heavy. I actually think it was a little bit lighter. We're actually putting the batteries in the front with some of the batteries in the front with it to give it a bit more down weight anyway. But as far as weight-wise goes, no, that's not a problem. Probably the bigger problem is that, you know, spreading the battery weight around a little bit. That might be more of an issue, you know.
Yeah, you certainly don't have a boot to put them in necessarily. Certainly not a plastic bedding.
I should have added some photos of the Holden Cruise we're doing here, because we basically took the fuel tank out of the back, and the fuel tank in that car was on one side, and there was the other side of the tail shaft was the same area. So we basically made metal boxes that we slung underneath on the original fuel tank battery bolts, and then just put some rubber grommets in the floor at the back and run the cables up into the car where the balance of the batteries were in the back. So, and that's a fairly big pack. It's about 24 kilowatt on that little car.
Okay.
So, you know, it can be done. We used a Hyper 9 on that one with a clutch, and it's an all-wheel drive vehicle. So we sort of balanced it out a bit by putting as much of the electronics in the motor in the front, and then just the batteries in the back.
Okay, so just in answer to Michael's second question, part of the weight and weight distribution issues is something that you really need to consider in the planning process. You ideally should be starting with the status quo of corner weights, weight distribution front to back. You might also have to look at brake balance distribution and that sort of thing. And from there, work out how they'll be changed. So there's lots of questions there. And also the vacuum system, you can fit little vacuum pumps and reservoirs that are driven off the electric system. And that might be something that we can look at next week. We're just coming up to 8 o'clock, and after the news and weather, we'll be opening our lines to callers, not necessarily. Got a question here from Ray about dealing with motor controllers, and I also saw another question about motorbike conversions. I think maybe if we could make a note of that, it might be an interesting topic for the next Charge Chat in a month's time, something to lead off with, because motorcycles are certainly an interesting field, and people like Harley Davidson have certainly made big strides in productionising the electric motorcycle.
We actually have an Aprilia here. We're doing a conversion on at the moment, so I'll get some photos for next month of that.
That'd be fantastic. It'll be good. An Aprilia. Nice. Very nice indeed. Okay, so if we could just wind up now, you can jump onto YouTube to watch past editions of Charged Chats. You subscribe to the EV Alliance channel for your chance to not win lots of valuable prizes. So thanks for joining us. Thanks to the EV Alliance members who have helped us out tonight. Thank you, Graeme. Thank you, Luke. And thank you, Paulie. And so, yes, please reach out and engage with your EV Alliance members. Wealth of information that they've learnt the hard way, and they're going to be more than happy to work with you. It would be even more ideal if you actually paid them to do some stuff. So thanks everyone for the chat. Thanks for the Q&A. Thanks again to Luke Konynenburg for sharing with us his Mercedes. And with that, we'll say good night, Godspeed, and farewell.